and welcome to Dice vs Cards. Today we're looking at Scythe and wondering whether the game is as depressing and as laden with mech-based combat as the box art would suggest. And also muse upon why the game is named after the weapon of choice for our Grim Reaper. But will all of that matter so long as we're diving headfirst into a swimming pool of glorious gameplay? Well, let's find out. So the object of the game is to be the player with the most coins or points when at least one player has completed 6 of the global objectives up here. So you each can have your own player board, and each of them are different in terms of the actions you can take and how much those actions cost, and also a faction map, and each faction will have its own differing starting point on the board, but also certain strengths and weaknesses as well. So each turn you're going to be taking actions on this player board, and you're going to place your pawn on one of the 4 sections of that board, and each of those sections has a top action and a bottom action available to them. So as this is the core part of the game, we'll go through those in a bit more detail now. So each player board will have, in a differing order, the top actions, but the bottom actions always remain in the same 4 spaces. So on this player board here, you can trade for resources, and you're going to be generating resources, and we'll get to the produce action in a moment, but you can simply take 2 of the resources you want, and then as an optional bottom action, and I should say that both actions are optional once you select them, you can also pay an oil resource to upgrade, and upgrading will affect your player board because you're going to be taking these cubes from the top actions on your board and placing them on an empty rivet there at the bottom. And what that's going to do is get you extra benefits when you use the top action, and also reduce the cost of the bottom actions. Next up on this player board we have the produce action, and this is where, depending on your workers are on the board, are going to produce that type of resource. So you've got here wood, oil, metal and food, and then the bottom action is to deploy mechs. Now mechs are deployed primarily as a means to help you in combat, but also as a means to ferry your workers, and you can ferry multiple workers from one space to another. Here then we have the bolster top action, and bolster allows you to increase your power, which is going to be a means within which you're going to be helpful in winning combat. The bottom action here paired with bolster is the build action, and there are 4 structures you can build, each that have their own abilities that are added to the game. For example, the mine will allow you to shortcut across the board. Then finally we have the move action. So movement is quite restricted in this game, even when you upgrade it. It's going to allow you to move your workers or your character across the board. And then that's paired with the enlist action, and this is a simple means that you're going to be getting passive bonuses when the other players take that particular action. So it might be to gain a power or to draw a combat card or something like that. So your player board is the bulk of the game, but you've also got some units and a board here, and as soon as you control a territory you can produce resources on it, you can move your characters around and uncover encounters that give you certain rewards. You're going to have objectives that you can complete, and also combat cards here are going to help you whenever 2 opposing factions share the same hex after movement. And combat is fairly straightforward in that you spend some of the power you've accrued and add any combat card powers you want depending on how many mechs are in that space. Then the player with the most power is the winner. But combat isn't as debilitating for the defeated party. All they do is simply remove all their units back to their home base. So play is going to carry on like that, as I've mentioned, until one player has completed 6 of these global objectives. And for example, that might be having 6 upgrades on their player board, or recruiting 8 of the workers and placing them on the board, that sort of thing. And once that's done, the game ends immediately and the scores are tallied up. And the scores are given primarily by multiplying your popularity by the number of global objectives you've met, the number of territories you control, and the number of resources you have at the end of the game. And you'll see here, depending on your popularity, will give you a certain amount of coins for each of those. There are other means of gaining points, but those are the primary ones. And it's then the player with the most coins, as I've already mentioned, that wins the game. So that's how this plays. What did I think of it? So what's good about the game? Well, first and foremost, it's those little player boards that you've each got. I could gaze longingly into their delights without even casting an eye over that communal player board, if I could get away with it. It really is the best and most well executed version of this sort of engine builder type player board, where you can, unless you're one particular faction, never take the same action twice in a row. Whilst that might not be groundbreaking, I would argue this is one of, if not the best executed version of that. And I would honestly play this little player board as its own mini game if I could. So the variable player powers on each faction also have their own starting area on the board, and it does a good job of balancing each faction and also encouraging a certain play style without falling into the trap of mandating a certain play style. So no matter what faction you select, you're still going to have all of the options you would have, and it's up to you how you want to maximize your faction's strengths and weaknesses. So the name of the game really here is strategy and forward planning. If you're not going to get delight out of forward planning, mapping out your next 2-3 turns, then you're probably not going to get much out of this game. Combat is secondary in this game, and it's also not as debilitating as most games would allow it. You never lose units, you're just transported back to your home base. So it's more a case of hindering your progress when you lose combat. So that never takes too much away from the plans you want to implement, but allows for some conflict in there as well. So what's not so good about the game? Well, there's two things that are subjective really, and the first one doesn't bother me in the slightest, but I'm putting it in here just in case, and that's that all of your actions are incremental, and by that I mean none of the turns you have will be particularly impactful. Yes, when you meet a global objective, that's certainly a stepping stone for you towards the end game, but you're always putting together pieces of a jigsaw, if you like, so that if that's not for you, then this game might also not be for you. And secondly, I really dislike games where the end comes abruptly. Certain thing happens, everybody put their tools down and start scoring. So many times, not so many times, but a few times I've played this, I thought, I'm just that close to doing what I wanted to do, and that 6-star gets placed. That's unfortunate, and it's something I really don't like, but again, both of these cons, if you like, are subjective. So finally then, for some deadly serious closing thoughts, and it turns out the game isn't half as depressing as the box art suggests. Those workers are just looking to do a good day's work, and the dual connotations of Scythe. It wasn't the Grim Reaper at all. And finally, there are no swimming pools, only lakes and rivers, but you can't have everything. So with all that being said, Dice vs Cards is going to give a final score of 9 out of 10. Sometimes a great game is just a great game, accept it. So that's it from me, I'll see you next time.
Suggested titles for a sequel: Machete, Escadilla, Shovel and Rake. No royalties required.